In 1092, Nizam al-Mulk, vizier to the most powerful sultan on earth, protected by an entire army, was stabbed by a man dressed as a Sufi holy man who walked calmly through his guards. Here is the question nobody has answered: how did that assassin get back out alive? Nobody recorded it. This isn't a story about murder. Murder is cheap. This is about a group of roughly 300 trained operatives who held entire empires in a chokehold for nearly 200 years, because the threat of death is infinitely more powerful than death itself. That's the system Hassan-i Sabbah built. Here's what you've probably already assumed: the assassins were fanatical killers driven by religious extremism, a death cult operating in shadows. That's wrong. Their primary weapon was almost never the blade. It was the letter that arrived the morning after, explaining exactly why they could have killed you but didn't. Hassan-i Sabbah was a scholar first. He studied theology, mathematics, and astronomy in Cairo under the Fatimid Ismaili establishment, then broke from them over a question of succession so technical that most historians still argue its significance. He left Cairo in 1081 with an idea that was more architecture than religion. The idea was this: you don't need an army if you control the vertical. In 1090, Hassan took the mountain fortress of Alamut in northern Persia, not by siege, not by force. He converted the garrison soldiers to his doctrine one by one over months, and then simply walked in when the commander was outnumbered from inside. Alamut sat at 2,100 meters elevation on a ridge so narrow that 12 men could hold it against thousands. Hassan immediately expanded the water cisterns and grain stores to last year's. He had no interest in conventional warfare. He was building something that didn't need to win battles, it needed to never lose one. His first assassination was Nizam al-Mulk, the man who ran the Seljuk Empire's day-to-day operations. Strategic. Precise. The message was unmistakable: the most protected man in the empire just died. If you move against Alamut, you are next. Within a year, the Seljuks were negotiating instead of attacking. Stop. Because here is where everything you think you know about the assassins collapses. The word Hashishin, the origin of our word assassin, was almost certainly an insult invented by their enemies. It meant hashish users, implying they were drug-addled fanatics. There is zero contemporary evidence they used hashish at all. Their enemies wrote the history. Marco Polo's account, the famous story of a secret garden paradise where recruits were drugged and shown a vision of heaven before being sent to die, was written 150 years after Hassan's death. It's almost certainly fabrication. But it became the dominant narrative in Europe. Entire Crusader military strategies were built on a story that was probably fiction. The actual recruitment process was intellectual. Ismaili doctrine had 7 levels of initiation, each one revealing deeper esoteric interpretation of Islamic texts. Recruits weren't drugged into loyalty. They were argued into it through theology so sophisticated that even hostile sources admitted the doctrine was compelling. These were educated men. Deliberately selected. The fidai, the operatives, the ones who actually performed assassinations, trained for years in language, disguise, and the customs of whatever culture they were infiltrating. One operative lived embedded in a target's household for 18 months before acting. 18 months of a false identity, sustained without a single error. They almost never ran. This is the detail that disturbs historians most. Fidai operatives typically made no attempt to escape after an assassination. They accepted capture or death. Not because they were drugged. Because their doctrine held that a martyr's death in service of the imam's cause guaranteed paradise. The belief was the weapon. The Crusaders encountered the assassins in Syria, where a branch had established itself under Rashid ad-Din Sinan, the Old Man of the Mountain. Both Crusader and Muslim powers began paying tribute to Alamut's Syrian branch. Richard the Lionheart was directly accused of ordering a hit through them. He denied it. The accusation alone tells you their reach. In 1192, Conrad of Montferrat, just elected king of Jerusalem, not yet crowned, was stabbed in the street by 2 fidai dressed as Christian monks. The political implications were immediate and catastrophic. The succession crisis that followed reshaped the entire Third Crusade. One planned action. decades of consequence. But here is the reversal that changes the entire picture. The assassins also failed. Repeatedly. They attempted Saladin's life at least twice, maybe 3 times. He survived all of them. And after the second attempt, instead of trying again, Hassan III, then Grand Master, negotiated a peace with Saladin directly. The most feared killers in the world blinked. This reveals something the legend obscures: the order was always pragmatic. It was never pure ideology. They shifted alliances, negotiated with enemies, accepted payments from powers they nominally opposed. They were, beneath everything, a state operating without conventional territory. A government of leverage rather than land. By the early 1200s, the order controlled a network of perhaps 50 mountain fortresses across Persia and Syria. Hassan's successors had expanded the doctrine but also diluted it. Some Grand Masters declared themselves divine. One, Hassan II, announced from Alamut's pulpit that Islamic law was abolished entirely. His own father-in-law killed him for it 4 years later. The internal contradictions were becoming fatal. But none of that mattered because in 1253, something appeared on the horizon that no amount of leverage or psychological terror could stop. Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, was moving west with an army whose explicit orders were the total destruction of the Islamic heartland. The Mongols didn't negotiate. The assassins had one response prepared: they sent Fidai operatives directly into the Mongol court. The attempt failed. Hulagu, reportedly enraged beyond reason, began his siege of Alamut in 1256. The current Grand Master Rukn ad-Din surrendered personally, believing he could negotiate as his predecessors had always negotiated. He could not. Hulagu's engineers dismantled Alamut stone by stone. Not burned, dismantled. The library was partially preserved by the historian Juvayni, who accompanied the Mongol army specifically to document what they destroyed. He was allowed to select some texts before the rest were burned. What he didn't select, we will never read. Those texts are gone forever. And here is the question historians cannot answer. The Syrian branch survived the Mongol destruction. The Nizari Ismaili line of imams survived, and still exists today. The Aga Khan is their 49th imam, leading millions of followers worldwide. So why, if the tradition continued, is the internal doctrine of the assassin still almost entirely unknown? What did they keep hidden? The most disturbing implication isn't the murders. It's this: every primary source about the assassins was written by people who feared them, hated them, or were paid by their enemies. The Crusaders demonized them. The Sunni establishment called them heretics. The Mongols burned their own records. We have almost no Ismaili sources. We built an entire mythology on the testimony of people with every reason to lie. So, the question from the beginning: how did the assassin who killed Nizam al-Mulk in 1092 get out alive? The honest answer is we don't know. The sources that survived say he was captured immediately. But one account, a single Ismaili fragment, says he wasn't captured at all. That he simply walked away. If that's true, then the terror was the story. Not the event. The story. In 1092, Nizam al-Mulk, protected by an entire army, was stabbed by a man dressed as a holy man who walked calmly through his guards. You spent this whole video wondering how that man escaped. But the assassins didn't need him to escape. They needed you to wonder. They still do. That's the system. It still works.